Well, I'm back on the in the hangar again, or more accurately, the garage, with my E-Flite 1.2 meter P-51. And if you've been following along, this is of course the Beater-51 project, which was a used P-51 that I restored over the course of 2 weeks for the main purpose of learning to fly the 1.2 meter series warbirds and help increase the number of takeoff and landings from the ground with warbirds. I have been flying P-51s now for a number of years, but they've all been smaller, and I've been hand launch and belly landed only. So I really wanted to get into the 1.2 meter series and eventually the 1.5 meter, but to do that I needed an airplane to practice with, hence this project here. So last night I went out to the flying field to do a range check, kind of do a last minute check of all the control surfaces and do some taxi tests on the runway. Our club is a grass strip, and so many of the reports online say, oh my gosh, the P-51, it can't be flown in grass, it noses over, it's completely useless in the grass. And I decided, well, I better try this thing out to see how well it even does and try to determine what to do next. So I ran down the runway doing a taxi test, kept the tail pinned, and I found that the airplane had no issues at all trying to nose over. It just simply added power and started moving. So no issues there whatsoever. Once I got underway, I started to add a little bit more power. I let off the elevator and let the tail come up, let the airspeed continue to rise. And at that point, I decided at this point, we're no longer at a high-speed taxi test. we're really borderline ready to fly. And so there's no video of the maiden flight because I really wasn't expecting it to be a maiden flight. I expected it to be a taxi test. So I built enough airspeed up and I just pulled back a little bit on the elevator and she was off. I did a couple passes, sucked the gear up, and had a lot of elevator trimming to do, but no issues there whatsoever. The winds were I think they're about 6 to 7 miles per hour at the time, so enough that AS3X was able to do its thing. And of course, I was really scared about this plane for multiple reasons. One, warbirds are somewhat intimidating to fly, especially if you spend a lot of time online, because the entire internet is convinced that you need millions of years of flying before you can actually fly a warbird. Also nervous about flying off grass with a warbird because the internet tells you that these are impossible to fly off grass and that nobody can fly them off grass, which that concerned me because I have a grass strip. I did also the programming for the receiver, the 637T that's in here. That's the first time I've ever programmed a receiver, and I've always been very nervous about doing so. I also programmed the AS3X, which I didn't have a turn-off, any way to turn it off because I'm using my trusty old DX6 here. So I had a number of factors working against me in terms of confidence to get it in the air. However, I had no issues at all, and once in the air, the plane was it was a lot of fun. And in reality, it's far easier to fly than I would have ever imagined. Like I said, I got the trimming taken care of. That took a little bit of time to get that nailed down, and once I did, the airplane, it flew remarkably well. And of course, being a used airplane, you have no idea what other hidden things could be out there, things that are gonna fall off, or is the nose just gonna separate from the airplane because it had been crashed and repaired so many times. So there was a lot of fear going into flying this airplane, and it all went away once I got it in the air. It looked fantastic, it flew fantastic, it was way easier to fly, way easier to take off than I would have ever imagined it to be. In some ways, I feel silly that the 1.2 meter series planes have intimidated me for years, because once I got it up there, I realized that I had nothing to be afraid of. I could have been flying this for a lot longer. As for landing, no issues on landing either. It was like I said, a little windy, so I just used half flaps. And I was concerned that, yeah, I might be nosing it over because the grass has not been cut at the field for almost a full week now. And so I thought, well, we'll give it a shot. It took off fine, maybe it will land fine. Sure enough, came right in, landed on the mains, gently pulled back on the elevator. Did get a little bit of a bounce. I carried a little too much airspeed, but set it right back down again on the mains. and let the airspeed bleed off, and then pulled back on that elevator to pin the tail to the ground, shut the engine off, and sure enough, no nose overs or anything. I didn't taxi with it. Figured that's just tempting fate, so I went out and picked it up off the airfield. But no problems at all in the air. I felt in the end extremely excited to fly it. Also a little silly that this airplane had intimidated me so much, and also a bit silly that programming a receiver intimidated me. With the E-Flite P-51 and the AR-637T receiver, I ended up having no problems at all, and all those fears just kind of subsided, and I really enjoyed the plane in the air. I flew on the 3S, 2200 3S. It's no speed demon on 3S by any means. I definitely kept quite a bit of throttle in it. Of course, being a maiden, I try to keep more throttle than necessary, so I didn't have the longest flight time. I set the timer for 5 minutes, and I came down just shortly after, I think it was about the 2.5 minute mark. I think at the 3 minute warning, I began to set up for my approach. The 2 minute warning, I actually came in on final approach, so it was actually probably closer to 1.5 minutes of time left when I was actually on the ground. And I think I had, about 55% battery still left out of the 2200. So you don't get the longest flight time out of a plane this size with a 2200, but that's okay. Obviously, first flight, I got some more tuning to do and really start to get into the aircraft and learn it better. Then I can maybe work on that timer a little bit, work on my throttle management, and then put a 4S in this thing and see how the thing will fly on 4S. But if you're thinking about the 1.2 meter series P-51 or any of the 1.2 meter series Warbirds, it's not a beginner aircraft by any means, but don't let it completely intimidate you like it did me for so long. Everybody seems to, it's almost like getting into a fraternity, and part of the hazing process is listening to all the naysayers say that you can't do it. Turns out I did it, and I don't consider myself an expert pilot by any means. Consider myself more of an intermediate, but I got over 11, a little over 1,100 flights now, 30 some different aircraft, and I had no trouble at all with this 1.2 meter P-51. So hopefully you won't be as intimidated as I was, and you can get out and enjoy the aircraft, fly the aircraft. It's a beautiful and rewarding aircraft in the air. Make sure that you do have some experience with tail draggers and low wing aircraft. Be ready on the right rudder to counteract the torque. I still got to work on that a little bit. I kind of veered off to the left quite a bit on takeoff, and so I got to work on that a little bit more. It's just kind of getting that timing and the finesse down between the throttle application, the elevator, and the rudder to get this thing to take off perfectly. Not to say you can't get it off in the air, but to get it off in a nice scale way and try to use as straight up in a takeoff as possible. You got to get a little bit more use on the right rudder. But the plane, it may look intimidating, and a lot of old timers will tell you, oh my gosh, the P-51, avoid that at all costs. Those things are impossible to fly. Well, I listened to that for way too long, and I spent years dreaming of flying this airplane. Since Blondie came out, I really wanted it, and I was always afraid to pull the trigger. June Knight came out, I was still afraid to pull the trigger. I eventually did last fall and bought my own that I repainted to Detroit Mist. I picked this one up 2 weeks ago to use as more of a trainer warbird, and I look back and say how silly it was for me to be so intimidated of these airplanes. Next up is to go fly this plane some more, really tune it, learn it, understand it, go fly Detroit Mist, and then probably look at adding the Corsair to my collection as well, which would be another kind of a full repaint and kind of a new livery and everything, because I so much enjoy doing that. So if you guys got any questions on flying the 1.2 meter P-51 or on the Beater-51 project, by all means, leave them in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to answer them, but I'll finish it with this. Don't let the airplane intimidate you where you spend years looking at it and don't pull the trigger. These are fantastic airplanes. They're far easier to fly than what the internet will ever tell you they are. You don't need to be in some special club and fly for decades to get into a P-51. This E-Flite P-51 fly is just fantastic. So don't be scared of it, and don't be scared of the 637T for programming it as I was. Receiver programming and nowadays with the forward programming is far easier than I would have ever imagined. So, but I'm gonna try to get the batteries charged up, get some trimming done, get it back in the air, and try to shoot some video of it this time so that you guys can see what it looks like in the air. I have not tried flying with the drop tanks yet. I do expect that to make it a little bit more draggy, so I want to try to fly the airplane without it, and then I'll try those a little bit later. So, if you guys, like I said, if you guys got any questions, just let me know.